Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home again this week. I'm happy to be here. This week, we are going to take a look at Catholicism, and we're going to take a look at maybe how groups that I would not necessarily call worldwide, international, destructive cults, yet, there can be situations of abuse, rampant abuse. There can be criminal activities going on in an organization without it necessarily having to be a destructive cult per se. And people can grow up or be involved in these groups and have incredibly negative experiences and carry even lifelong trauma as a result of their experiences. And that deserves to be looked at because there is this thing called spiritual abuse or spiritual trauma or religious trauma. And this is a real thing. And it happens in the world, and it happens far too often. So, on that note, this week I am welcoming guest Anthony Spurgin. Hi, Anthony. Welcome to my show.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here.
Yes, nice to have you. Now, you've reached out to me because you have a story to tell about your upbringing and about Catholicism and the influence it had on your life. Am I tracking with that properly?
Absolutely. And I would like to, the only thing I'll say there is that the distinction I'll be making here is traditional Catholicism, which you could call, they call themselves tradies.
Tradies? Really?
Yeah, tradies. Yeah.
Wow. Tradies. Okay.
So that is a flavor and style and experience of Catholicism that is very, very different from the modern mainstream experience of Catholicism. However, the experience I had was what Catholicism was for most of its existence, basically up until the 1960s.
Right. So in other words, we're talking about the change of Vatican II.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
The change in Vatican II was a huge deal in the Catholic Church, and it split it into two kind of factions. Basically, you could think of as the mainstream, your average Catholics, such as the current president of the United States, and he is definitely an average Joe kind of Catholic, But you also have the traditional Catholics who did not like what happened at Vatican II, and for all intents and purposes reject what was done there and want to keep doing things pretty much exactly the same way.
Okay, I get it. I get that. So I guess then that this is more in reference to the Catholicism that my mother grew up with, and which she actually has told me a few times impelled her into Scientology, because she had such a negative reaction to her upbringing and to the belief set that was forced on her and the way that it manifested in her life. And she was the oldest of 9 children, big Catholic family, Midwest,
Yep.
Traditional, like hardcore. And she went to Catholic school. She went to Catholic nursing school. So she was quite tied in with that. And her whole attitude coming out of that was, that was not a positive experience for me. So
what decade are we talking about here? Is this like the 40s?
Well, I'm born in the 50s, I think, but she certainly grew up through the 50s and 60s with this. Yeah. Pre the Vatican II thing, which was what, 62, 64?
Yeah, early 60s. Yeah, I believe it started in 62, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go ahead. So I'm just offering that as a, from my own personal experience, like this has even touched my life with my mom. And like I said, she wasn't even like shy about it. It was like, that was just awful. So what was your experience of this tradcat thing, this traditional Catholicism experience for you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll just set the stage real quick. I was born in Dallas, Texas in '96 and grew up in a suburb of Dallas called Irving. Irving has a few distinctions in that it's where the Cowboys used to play, and I actually watched the old stadium implode. They sort of like bombed it and imploded it. So watching a football stadium collapse was a pretty interesting experience. And Lee Harvey Oswald, the assassin of President Kennedy, lived in Irving for a little while. And also, it seems to have a lot of cults represented here. We've got the Dallas Scientology building is in Irving. I could literally walk right now from where I'm at to a Unification Church center.
Wow.
That's within walking distance of my house, and there's more than one Kingdom Hall of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They all kind of congregate here. It seems like
interesting. A congregation of cults.
Exactly. Yeah. How nice, right?
Right.
You could also throw in there the Catholic Church that I was raised in. So I was raised Catholic, and my dad was raised Catholic, and my mom was a convert from Methodism. So they met at Catholic college and stayed in the area, and I grew up there. And growing up, they kind of went to different parishes. Like there were a lot of different churches in the area. So for the most part, growing up, I would go to more normal mainstream churches, but I was homeschooled a lot. In the homeschooling community, they gravitated more toward the traditional side. And at that point, growing up, the traditional Catholics in Irving didn't have their own building. They were sort of using the parish of the nuns, the Carmelite nuns nearby. But at some point, right when I was about to start high school, they got their own building in Irving, and the parish was called Mater Dei, Latin for Mother of God. And the name of the school, the school I went to, was called Our Lady of Fatima Homeschool Co-op. And just for anyone out there who's not clear what a homeschool co-op is, the mainstream idea of homeschooling kind of seems to be you're at home and your mom and dad are teaching you classes. And my mom is a teacher, a Montessori teacher, so I had that a little bit, but for the most part, I was not having classes at home. I was having classes at either somebody else's house, a big house that they owned, where all the families would come and we'd have classes in different rooms there, because there was a community of Catholics who were into homeschooling. So it was not really an isolated experience. There were quite a lot of other people involved in this. And when they got their own building, we did classes, the homeschool classes there. They had a little school building next to the chapel building. And so from 2010 to 2014, I attended high school at Our Lady of Fatima Homeschool Co-op. And it was a very, very it was a traumatic experience. And I've had a lot of time and I've only recently realized in really the last 3 or 4 months, maybe, how truly the true effect it had on me, and how I still carry with what I went through during that time. So I could talk more about I'm going to for sure talk more about the abuse I suffered and the experience and all of that. But I think I might need to talk a little bit more about the traditional Catholics and what what happened at Vatican II and the split there, just so people can understand more of where this environment is coming from and everything. So in the 60s, the Catholic Church had a very radical change. And it's kind of, you know, Chris, you've probably heard people ask you. You've asked a lot. You've probably been asked by a lot of people about Scientology. You know, could it get better? Could you like change the bad stuff and just keep the good stuff, pretty much? And you and I know that that's just not possible because of the structure of the thing. But it kind of happened with the Catholic Church. They didn't really change any of the teachings, but they stopped talking about. They decided to, like, we're going to have a different emphasis. We're going to do mass differently. It's not going to be this somber, intense affair. It's going to be more joyous and lighthearted. And we're going to emphasize more the compassionate, side of Christ's message, whereas the traditional Catholics emphasize the harsh, fire and brimstone, legalistic, you follow the rules or else kind of approach. And so they changed the way Mass is done. So the music, instead of sounding like, Gregorian chant, this very kind of creepy, kind of somber sort of way of chanting and singing.
Thing like that.
Ave Maria. Like that way of singing. Yeah. The music now, your average Catholic church sounds like Peter, Paul, and Mary. That's how the music pretty much sounds like now. If you're at your average church, they're playing guitar. They're singing songs that have the same chord progression as songs that were out in the 60s, because that was what they were reacting to. Really, they were reacting to the cultural changes that were blossoming in the country. And I think the church, the Pope at the time, I think his name was John the 23rd, who was the one who started everything at Vatican II.
Mm-hmm.
He realized we got to get with the times here. We can't. The world's changing, and we got to change with it. And of course, for the person who has a fanatical mindset, that sort of attitude is, well, you're doing it wrong. Then this is an aberration. The crazy people have taken over the train, and now it's a watered down, mealy, ineffectual thing.
Sort of the would they go so far as to call it heretical? Is that
the heresy is a spiritual in the Catholic Church, where the heresy is a spiritual no-no, like a false thing, like a false statement,
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't. Some of them do go so far as to a subgroup inside the traditional Catholics called the Sedevacantists, and Mel Gibson is a Sedevacantist. And the Sedevacantist viewpoint is that the Catholic Church has not had a real pope since Vatican II.
That explains a few things about Mel Gibson. Wow, I did not know that about him.
Yeah, no, he does not believe Francis is the actual pope. He believes Francis is a pretender to the throne, and that someday maybe I think he thinks that someday the tradcats are going to take it back over. But the Sedevacantists are a smaller subgroup of the traditional Catholics, but they tend to be the most vocal. Tradcats tend to be really vocal online, and they like to create YouTube channels, and they like to be loud. Like that's kind of how it is. The people who are just in the faith, in the religion for their own personal spiritual benefit, and because they feel like it helps, it gives them comfort and everything. The traditionalists, the tradcats, think that what happened in Vatican II, some will go farther than others, of course. Some will say that, they're going on the wrong direction. Not that they've totally, it's not the church anymore, but that we need to get back in the right direction. And so there was a split where there was one bishop who consecrated bishops against the Pope's will after Vatican II. And he was kicked out of the church. And then some followers of him went to the Pope and asked to be allowed back in. They wanted to keep doing the traditional stuff, but they agreed to allow the Pope to still have authority over them. And that group became the Fraternity of St. Peter. And that was the society that that ran the chapel I was brought up in, where I went to high school at. The Fraternity of St. Peter were tradcats who they didn't like Vatican II overall, but they weren't willing to go so far as to reject its validity. They were willing to sort of play along while keeping their old rituals and practices and way of doing things. There's other groups like the Society of St. Pius X, who are not recognized by the church, and the Sedevacantists don't even think the Pope is the Pope. So they're completely kind of separate from the whole the whole situation there. So
all right.
that's basically the setup.
Yeah, thank you for that, for clarifying all of that, because this is all pretty new territory for me, and I have not been so naive as to think that that the worldwide Catholic movement is all monolithic and all on the same page and all following one guy, the Pope and the Vatican. But I wasn't aware that some of the I guess you could call these denominations, like these denominational differences, were so intense within the Catholic world. This is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Just as a point.
There was one Pope. So Pope John Paul II. There were 2 attempts on his life. One guy shot him and he didn't die. One guy stabbed him and he didn't die. The guy who shot him, I think, was just crazy. I don't know what exactly. I don't think he had a real clear motivation for doing it. But the second guy, the guy who stabbed Pope John Paul, was a traditionalist Catholic priest, and he removed the bayonet off of a rifle, and he ran up to Pope John Paul after he'd already been shot and recovered, and he ran up to him with the bayonet and said, "Down with the Second Vatican Council," and he stabbed the Pope with the bayonet, and the Pope survived that as well. But that's how intense this war, this conflict got, that a guy tried to stab Pope John Paul over it.
Wow. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to throw questions that might be really ignorant, so bear with me if I do. Is there a concept of an antichrist? Would they take this that far with stabbing the Pope, that this is somehow, Satan brought to life or something, trying to corrupt the church or undo the church? Do they think that way?
They do think that way. There's something, so they wouldn't think he's the actual Antichrist.
Okay.
The Antichrist is a very, very specific, from what I was taught, he's a very specific person, and he has very, very specific characteristics.
Okay.
One of them is he's Jewish. One of them is I was taught that he has to be Jewish for him to be the Antichrist.
Okay, got it on that. Yeah. Okay.
Which, at the time didn't ring any anti-Semitic alarm bells. I was just a kid, but kind of does now,
Right. Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and there were other things
somehow this guy got the idea that Pope John Paul the 23rd was somehow an agent of evil and needed to be done away with.
Yes. Okay. He would have called him a type of the Antichrist. And what I was taught was traditional Catholics are big on types, which means it's something that actually happened, but it's a true event that God caused to happen in order to foreshadow something in the future. So a type of the Antichrist would be a person who is not the Antichrist, but has similar characteristics of him, and he's supposed to remind us, we need to remember the Antichrist. He's going to be here one day. So that's sort of what the idea of it is, that it's sort of like in Catholicism, human history, it's all one big story, right? They're huge on narrative and story, and so to them, we're all like characters in a story God is writing, basically. And of course, there's protagonists and antagonists, there's the good guys and the bad guys. So they very much, they're constantly trying to take current events, in a very conspiracy theory kind of mindset, to weave everything they see around them together into sort of this tapestry to explain things that like, this happened because, and I heard this a lot, the priest, this one priest in particular, he was always like, so in the book of Revelations, it says so and so and so. Well, I was reading this one book that in the translation, it said that beast means that. So what I think the book of Revelation is really talking about is that in World War II and Hitler and all of that. So taking modern events and tying them over to the book of Revelation, creating this whole sort of epic story, about relating to, God and the devil and he would talk about different politicians and everything and say, like, it's just like when Lucifer didn't want to obey God, he's acting like Lucifer and stuff. And so they're very big on on narrative and story, and very similar to every cult too, is you get caught up in the idea of the mission and the glorious reward when you're done with it, and the suffering you endure. It sucks now, but think of how vindicated you'll be when it's all over, So
that makes sense.
Off the reservation, off left field there. But if you want to narrow me back again, Chris.
No, that's that. I'm happy to hear about this because I'm asking you questions as we're going here because I'm literally I just don't know, and I couldn't agree with you more about the power of narrative. This is the way that you communicate complicated ideas or belief sets to any group of people, because almost anybody can follow a storyline. And this is, entertainment, movies, stories. This is fairy tales. Yeah. This is how you get very important ideas across to people, no matter what their intellectual level or engagement is. They can get the story of it, and yeah. Our communicative, societal brains just kind of run with that as truth, and it's so that's why it has such power for us. It makes sense to me. Tell me if I'm following here, because it makes sense to me that if you come from and are raised in a traditionalist belief, especially, going back a few decades, where this is how you were brought up and this is how it is, and it's fire and brimstone and it's sinners in the hands of an angry God, and it is, this is how we are supposed to be, that somebody coming along with a Vatican II, hey, let's lighten up a little bit. Let's chill out and maybe appeal to more people. I could see why some hardcore members would be like, excuse me, what this is not okay. This is totally wrong, and would continue these beliefs. Unfortunately, this lends itself to abuse. Physical abuse and again, psychological, spiritual abuse. How did that manifest in your existence growing up in this tradcat thing?
Right. Well, we all know culturally, we're all very much aware of the horrific child abuse that the Catholic Church has been up to for centuries, really. Let's
just say forever. Just say it. Yeah, forever. That's right.
I would say probably.
Yeah.
There's something that would be said in the tradcat world as a way to deflect from that is that there was a stupid thing said there that was a Vatican II problem, like that. That's what happens when like Vatican II happened and then all the abuse happened, and so it doesn't happen with us, that was the mindset that they had, and so. But what was done to me, I will unequivocally categorize as sexual abuse. However, it was not in the sense of I was touched physically, because I was not. That did happen to me when I was 11, but it was not by a priest. It was just by a dude, and I've worked through that in my own way also. But when I got to be 14 and started school here, there were two priests who were running the church. Basically, there was Father Langua and Father Wolf. Father Langua was a young guy. He was handsome. He looked like he could be an actor. And the Father Wolf was not so handsome. He was older. He had glasses. He was balding. He was sterner, and he always had this kind of expression on his face like that. Just a very he just ate sour candy, or that kind of solemn, stern kind of look. And Father Langua has since been laicized. He's been stripped of his priesthood because he had an affair with a married woman. Which is that's immediate. You're out as a priest. They take a vow of celibacy. Father Wolf currently has been suspended. He is not a priest. He is a priest still, but he is not allowed to. And this was done by the Fraternity of St. Peter, the traditional order he was a part of. He's being suspended by them. He was a little too cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs for their taste. He's I've actually been in a process where I've been communicating with his superiors, with the local bishop, trying to get him laicized, removed from the priesthood permanently, because it's what he deserves, and he should not be allowed to be around children anymore, ever again. It's a dicey area as whether you could say he did anything criminal to me, and I'll get into the details of that in a little bit. But that's the situation with him right now. So
okay.
Father Landro was just not there very often. Father Wolf was usually the one who was running things and giving the sermons, and he had and his sermons, a lot of his homilies and sermons, by the way, are available on YouTube, so you can hear in his own voice some of these things he said. Among other things, he had the main factor here was issues regarding sex. The Catholic Church, its teachings about sex are very, very obviously very culturally backward, very antiquated, and the modern Catholic Church kind of recognizes that and doesn't really. They're there. The teachings are there. You still kind of have to. They still kind of expect you to follow them, but they're probably going to give you communion if you're divorced and remarried. They're probably going. Many churches have started becoming a lot more welcoming to LGBT members of the LGBT community. Pope Francis, he can't really change any of the doctrine, but he definitely comes across as someone who's interested in a much more compassionate, liberal, caring approach to the church. But in terms of teachings, what the church's hardcore teachings are, it's, the only sex is only for the married, for a man and a woman. And you're expected to never use contraception, even when you're married. LGBT, forget about it. Just don't forget about it. They even said at one point, which the tradcats like to say a lot, that Satan himself is like he's disgusted by same sex. Like it even disgusts him.
Wow.
Which is such a illogical. I mean, just looking at it logically, that's a completely illogical thing. Like when you're gay, it's so bad. Even Satan's disgust. Like Satan's like, come on, dude. Like that's the mindset they're in when it comes to those kind of issues, And so they call homosexuality a sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance.
For vengeance. Jesus Christ. Wow.
That is a term they say all the time. Homosexuality cries out to heaven for vengeance.
Wow. Wow.
And so,
sorry, but it's just it's backwards. It's just such backwards thinking.
Wow is right. Huh. And I was fortunate. I mean, obviously now I know that there's nothing wrong with being gay, but I was fortunate to not have to not be gay, and then the fact that I didn't have to deal with that level of. I can only imagine. I know for sure there were at least two friends of mine there who were gay, and I haven't spoke to them about what they went through and their experiences, but I can only imagine. And if either of you are listening to this, I'm very sorry for what you went through. But anyway, what happened to me is that, Father Wolf, he took these teachings and ran with them. He encouraged scrupulosity. He took that line, hold every thought captive, and he just took it to its ultimate extreme. I was raked over the coals constantly in confession for, any kind of sexual thoughts whatsoever. And this is when I'm turning 14. This is when, these things are hitting into overdrive. And right when I'm turning 14, this training starts to just sort of push down any sexual thoughts, desires whatsoever. Just push it down. The idea is that, at some point, there'll be a girl there in the community. I mean, the idea of marrying someone outside the tradcat community was, I mean, they say you can't marry anyone who's not Catholic, and especially, but most especially you should marry traditional Catholics. I mean, you have to marry someone who's of the same traditional Catholic faith is not explicitly said, but the idea is like it's not going to work out. if you're not married to someone who's in the exact same mindset with you about all this stuff, because they plan out your life so explicitly. And for me, I wanted this life. Like, it wasn't like at the time, like the idea of, being of marrying at a young age and having a lot of kids, that seemed great to me, because that was presented as great at the time. That was sort of the greatest achievement in this world. So I was my sexual identity was pulverized, to sum it up, basically, because even looking at like going to the pool, I was constantly looking away at all the girls in bikinis. I was going at the grocery store, you see the magazine racks, you look away. The stuff's kind of everywhere. And so, and but that was a common thing of Father Wolf. He would preach a lot about how, this stuff's everywhere. We just can't escape it. We know, and we gotta build our fortresses. In the fortress mentality, it was explicit. They would talk about building your fortress, the family is your fortress, all the time. They would use that language. They weren't ashamed of it. They weren't ashamed of that kind of characterization. So I was not able to, in any way, in a healthy way, explore my sexuality in my teenage years. I was constantly fighting it, constantly suppressing it. I was physically hurting myself to expunge sexual thoughts at his orders. One thing he told me to do in confession was to put my fingers on the floor and to kneel on them, which is very painful. And I was doing this at age 14, 15 to get rid of thoughts of bikinis in my head. And so I'm not an ex-
let me just interject real fast here for the audience. I mean, this is, there's something that needs to be said here about our progress in understanding trauma and abuse. Because coercive control, now becoming a law in various states in terms of domestic violence, is a kind of domestic violence that doesn't involve having to hit or beat on your spouse in order for it to be coercive or abusive. We're coming out of the mindset that you're okay if nobody hit you, because we need to, because it's not humane to treat ourselves or each other in abusive and coercive ways. And when you are directing all of the efforts of teenagers or adults in a direction of suppressing their emotional life, their sexual feelings, their hormonal responses to things, I'm not suggesting that hedonism is the answer. I'm saying that going in the direction of suppressing these things rather than understanding them and dealing with them and taking them at what they are, biological urges that are not sinful and are not by their very nature evil. And this is how these things are framed in these groups. When you do that to somebody, you are creating in them a lifetime forward of self-abuse. And if you want to know what's at the heart of all the Catholic controversy and awfulness with the kids, it's this. I'm not kidding. This is how it starts. Is you take somebody and you convince them that they are evil, or there's something inside of them that is evil, that is perfectly normal and perfectly biologically, organically wonderful, right? Our sexual urges and desires to reproduce are a good thing. And I just needed to kind of soapbox on that for a second, because I don't want people thinking, well, what's the big deal? It is a big deal, and we need to start thinking about it that way. And sorry, I just had to plug in there at this moment. So please go on.
No, I appreciate it, Chris. I really do. I appreciate the validation, and I myself, in my head, played the "it's not a big." Sometimes I would play the "it's not a big deal" thing as well. Because I would think, well, I can't really call it sexual abuse because he didn't touch me, but
it is.
You need to expand your definitions a little bit. You need to expand my thinking, because I know I know in my body I can feel in my body the effects of the abuse.
Yeah.
Because it's a work in progress. I've gotten, my sexual life has had definitely, it's a struggle for sure. I've been in therapy for it. It's been very, very helpful, very beneficial. I want to thank you again, Chris, for getting me on that path to address the religious trauma in therapeutic ways. I hadn't really thought to do that before, but it's been a big help.
Good.
And so thank you for that, Chris. And also, yeah, I mean, I think that the definitions of abuse now need to be reexamined.
Yeah.
We have, the word is so it's loaded for sure, but it also kind of has a narrow definition in someone's mind as well. They imagine a scenario where in the moment you're in pain, in the moment you're feeling, you're having a negative reaction. Whereas in the moment with him, I was thinking, yeah, this is hard, but I'm so privileged to have found this mystical man, this wise teacher who's, and of course he was lionized in the community. He was a hero because the idea around him, I'm talking about Father Wolf still here. The idea around him was, oh, like he's a hard ass, but he says it like it is. He's our, and that kind of attitude of like simply exuding an aura of aggression and of intensity is good in and of itself. That, no, it's not. You have to direct. It can be. You have to direct it towards something good, but when they're like, yeah, he just says it like it is. Well, he says what like it is, like saying it like it, what it is the teachings of the church, the teachings about sexuality. But those teachings are just, really, just when you get down to it, what it actually say, the teachings are the problem here. They're destructive and they're harmful, and they're inherently abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Catholic Church in the 60s sort of dealt with the problem by deciding to not talk about them, and like that's sort of, or choosing rearranging their focus. But the tradcats are really good at pointing to the text, like pointing to the documents. That's what they do all the time. They read through. They're very, very legalistic. They're like the guy. What actually it says here in the contract, you can't actually do that. They're that guy. They're the people who are obsessed with the print, what's written. Whereas, without having any considerations of what's human,
Right.
And so Father Wolf also, he never hit me, but he did encourage corporal punishment on minors. I will say that other people who were ministered to by him told me that as well.
Yeah, I might, that's just another point I'd like to make here for the audience, because these are points I have to highlight only because I keep running into, over the years that I've been talking about physical abuse and psychological abuse with kids, I am always met with some pushback on this concept or idea that spanking kids is a good idea. This is that I consider it child abuse. I don't think it's okay to be beating on kids. Disciplining children by hitting them repeatedly with sticks, with rulers, with your hand, with a belt. Any of this is, as far as I'm concerned, it's wrong. It's wrong in the same way that you don't teach adults by beating on them. I mean, you can condition any living creature, human or not, You can condition it with violence. But to think that that's a humane approach and it's a rational approach and that you're going to create a better human being through that is just not right. It's not true. And the danger of it, there is an actual danger to beating kids. And that is that there are genetic factors at play. There are, DNA issues here where a person can potentially genetically be on the edge in terms of maybe becoming a sociopath, maybe becoming a psychopath. And this is where the nurture part of this comes in. If you don't nurture that kid properly, if you beat on that kid, you can beat them by raising their stress levels. When you beat on them, that's what happens. Chemical processes occur where these genes become activated and they become little sociopaths because that's what you're turning them into. This is a point of study. Yeah. This is not just my opinion. I just needed to throw that out there because, again, some people are like, well, I was beaten when I was a kid. I was spanked and I don't see the problem. It's like, look, just because you were and you think you're okay doesn't mean it's okay as a broad thing. And anyway. So, yeah.
So something else Vatican II changed was they actually removed something that was basically they removed a practice of physical abuse from one of their rituals. So there's confirmation is when a young man or young woman in Catholicism is sort of like the idea you become a soldier of Christ and of course traditional Catholicism is filled with militaristic phrases and terms. The Pope used to have an army. I mean, the Crusades, we could talk about that. It's that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. And the Crusades and Galileo and the Inquisition, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But what used to happen is for the men in confirmation, after the Pope sort of or not the bishop, after the local bishop sort of blessed you with the oils and whatever and did the ceremony, he slapped you in the face. And that was supposed to be like getting you ready for the world, getting you like one little slap to sort of like prime you for the hardships you're going to have to face as a man, and that wasn't done to me because I was actually confirmed at a different parish, not the church that not the one at modern day. And that didn't happen to me. Thankfully. Was not hit in the face. But I did hear from time to time some sermons from the tradcat priests. They'd say things like, "Man, they won't let us hit them in the face anymore. Like the church has gone soft, And that was another common criticism, common thread is the church has become feminized. It's gone soft.
Right.
It's not manly anymore. And that was sort of the key issue, the key thread there. The tradcats love to talk about all the, they totally defend the Crusades were awesome. The Inquisition was awesome, misunderstood. Maybe a little bit of bad stuff happened, but it gets way overblown, by the culture. They love, stories of the saints that involve battle and warfare. It's that pathetic sort of macho, faux macho, kind of attitude. And of course, the women have to wear headdress. The women have to wear headdresses, sort of similar veils, sort of similar to what Muslim women have to wear when they're in church, not out and about in public. Some Catholic women, just to show how devoted they are, wear the veil all the time and wear the long skirts all the time. But in Mass, the women are supposed to have their heads covered. Also there's another, you mentioned, Chris, about, corporal punishment and hitting and how people will respond with, well, it happened to me, or that's how it's always been done. That is another key element into what drives their belief is, of course, and it's in the name, traditional Catholics, the mere fact that it's been done the exact same way, basically for 2,000 years is sufficient for them. Like that to them. And I don't compute with that anymore. The idea that, simply because a practice has been passed down for generations, that doesn't mean necessarily that it's a good thing to do, or that all it means is that a long time ago, somebody was able to convince another person that something was important enough to pass down.
That's
And
right.
the fact that it's with, and they'd say things like, it's withstood 2,000 years. It's been here 2,000 years. So what? So what? That doesn't mean what you're saying is true. But to them, that's such a conversation ender. That argument from tradition, that to them is such a gotcha.
Totally.
And it was to me too. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's called a thought stopping cliche, or a thought terminating cliche, right? It's a set of words that you can say and you don't have to think anymore. It just shuts down thinking. And that's a perfect example of one. Traditionalism, or, appeal to tradition or to authority, is a classic. Mm-hmm. And there are a million variations of it, but it's a classic cult control technique. And it doesn't just happen in cults, of course, but it's really celebrated in them. Right? People have pride in them. They actually consider it a feature, not a bug. I mean, there are many, many people who will tell you across the religious spectrum that the Bible is written, that the thinking was done. I don't have to think anymore, right? It's right there. And of course, being as legalistic and literal as these folks are, as you mentioned, how it's all about the words and this is what it says, and so therefore, this is not a group of people who are really interested in or thinking that progressive thinking or evolutionary thinking is a good idea. They think that's a bad idea. It's all kind of backwards world there. Yeah.
And I just it made sense at the time, when you, without thinking about it, the idea that it's always been done this way, let's not rock the boat, let's keep doing it the same way. That initially, it's sort of like it fits together, at first, you can understand it, but if you delve deeper, you think, okay, but what has been passed down? You can make the same argument about Islam. Islam has lasted pretty much. I mean, I'm fuzzy on the dates, but I think Islam's lasted just for about the same amount of time as Christianity, and Judaism has outlived Catholicism and Christianity, and that's still around, right?
Yeah. So I mean, Islam is a bit younger than Christianity, but yeah.
I know it is a bit younger, but not by much. Right. And so that the time, the test of time argument.
Yep.
For when you could take Islam and also Judaism, because of course Catholicism and Christianity can't exist without Judaism having come before it. Yep. That argument just falls apart. And so, and another issue too here is the sexual teachings and how crazy they are. I've often wondered where that came from, because Jesus does not talk about sex. He really doesn't. Mm-hmm. It seems to have, what I can tell, come from Paul. Mm-hmm. And Paul is this weird figure in the Bible. He comes in after the party's over, kind of like Jesus has already ascended. Paul is Peter's the Pope, right? He's the first Pope in the early church. And then this guy Paul comes in, who's like, "Hey, I had a vision. God spoke to me, and you guys are doing it wrong, and I'm gonna take over." And Peter has deference to Paul, and so Paul's a strange character for me, because his letters and his writings seem to originate. That seems to be where all these weird teachings about marriage and being gay and all that seem to originate. Mm-hmm. And it's strange that this guy just sort of inserted himself into what was going on after Jesus and all that, and sort of took to, anyway, that's getting into biblical history and stuff, which I don't pretend to be an expert on.
No, but I will say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I will say this. There have been more than a couple people who've suggested to me over the years that if Paul were a real person, and there are ideas that he really did live, that he really existed, there is a question about that. I have more questions about whether Jesus lived than Paul did. I think there was some Paul figure because of the way that it's described. This is a very human person, and this person is very crazy. And that's my assessment of it. That's me. Yeah. I get that. I'm going to get a lot of hate for that, but this is what I agree with you. And because of, and I say these things because of the values that he put forward are extremely toxic. These are very bad values for humanity. They're not humanistic values. And it has been suggested that perhaps he suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy as an individual, as a person, the same way we thought L. Ron Hubbard did. Religious, strong religious epiphanies. I saw the light on the road. This whole thing that these experiences he had, and his fanaticism is what really comes through, right? And fanaticism is not the key characteristic of fanaticism is not rational thinking. It's sort of the opposite, right? So you have
they're kind of opposites.
Well, exactly. And I'm no biblical expert either, but I can certainly say that I can agree with a lot of things that Jesus conceptually put forward. I can go, yeah, that sounds good. But then you have this Paul guy come along and kind of turn it all upside down and backwards, and priests must be celibate and all of this nonsense. And this is where I was soapboxing earlier about how when you're trying to suppress who and what we are as biological beings, you're going to lose 100% of the time. It just isn't going to work out for you. And this has been one of the key struggles of the church through the centuries, is this denial of who and what we really are. This is my take on it, of course, but
Yeah. Well, the Father Wolf, and the whole tradcat community, they would kind of agree with you. Father Wolf would say sometimes, yes, naturally speaking, what I'm saying, this is impossible. Like, no, I never kissed a girl until I was 20. My girlfriend at the time, we were never alone. We hugged. That was it. We held hands sometimes. We hugged, and we did like little grandma, like the kind of kisses you'd give your grandmother. And so that was the environment. And I went to Father Wolf one time, and I said, I'm struggling because I really want to kiss my girlfriend, but shock, right? I know, but. And I said, I'm having trouble with what you said, because this, most, like, the not kissing is not what they say in mainstream Catholicism. That's a tradcat thing. And he was saying, naturally speaking, this isn't possible, but God's grace will allow you to do it. So you just need to keep praying for God's grace. So for them, when you go to them and you say, I'm struggling, and I'm struggling with what you're telling me to do, I can't biologically do it. The answer is fairy dust.
Right.
Just sprinkle some fairy dust and you'll be good. And you're like, got it. Thanks. I will go find the fairy dust, or I'll ask God for it, and he'll sprinkle it on me, and then I'll be good to go. So and then of course, you're conditioned in confession, like an auditing in Scientology, right? You have to leave it with having an epiphany, and so in confession, you're saying these bad things, and then he's saying, I forgive you of your sins. And the idea is that God's forgiving you of your sins. So you leave the confessional feeling amazing, because you feel like I'm right with God now. God just forgave me, and I'm good with him. I just got to sin no more, and I'm good. And of course, at the time you're not real. Like, at the time you think, oh, I feel so good, of course I'll never sin again. Not realizing biology will have something to say about that. But just like in Scientology with auditing, they're creating the problem.
Right.
They're creating you feel good because you've just solved a problem that they've created for you. You wouldn't have had the guilt that you're being relieved of if they hadn't told you about it in the first place.
That's a brilliant observation, Anthony, because that's exactly right. The whole thing is a circular trap. It's a circular logic trap that keeps itself going. It's a sort of, we talk about if somebody could invent the perpetual motion machine,
Yeah.
Well, this is it. It's, it's a circular logic system that you become trapped in. You can't get out of it. And it is a trap. It's a mental trap.
Mm-hmm.
And raising kids with this before they're able to think critically about it, before they're able to challenge these ideas or wonder whether or how they might apply to their own life experiences. It's just, no, it's mandated. This is how it is. It's very dictatorial. It's very authoritarian. And
I want to speak to that real quick if I can.
Yeah.
You're right. Children should not be raised, should not be anywhere near this kind of environment.
Yeah.
I've spoken to my parents about all of this, and they have apologized to me for what happened. They totally recognize they're still Catholic, the same church. Father Wolf is not part of that church anymore. Like I said, he's suspended. I don't know if the environment is different right now. I don't. I haven't been there in a long time. But they recognize that Father Wolf was a bad guy. And so they're the church. They are, and I'm at peace with them as well. And so my relationship with them is very good. And as of in these kinds of incidents, the pain that's woven into this just splits the families apart. And that's one of the greatest tragedies. That's one of the greatest tragic effects of these cultic situations and cultic environments. And I'm just very grateful that that didn't happen for me, and that they understand that these bad stuff happen. And there sort of is, from what I've been able to tell, there sort of is an understanding that this particular priest was an aberration. He went too far. He was loved. What still frustrates me, of course, is that he was awesome at the time, and I was presented to me as sort of like the man I should listen to and my moral authority, and he was my moral authority. But based on stuff I've spoken and based on the recordings you can listen to, when you can actually hear him say in his own words, young boys should kneel on their fingers to expel sexual thoughts, and he's been suspended. He's probably I'm very, very certain that he will never be a priest again, or he'll never be put in ministry again, based on the conversations I've had with some of his superiors on the phone. I can't confirm that, but one of his superiors did tell me on the phone. He said something like, "Based on what you've told me, I'm never putting him in authority again." So,
good.
However, while I'm grateful for that response on everyone's part, while I'm very grateful for that, I do believe that he is still he made a good case if it's all true. If it's all true, he went through the documents, he quoted things. It seems to me that if it's all true, his version of what to do is the correct one, because there were saints of the church who apparently he got that idea of kneeling on the fingers from a saint who instructed that to be done as well. And there is a definitely a tradition in the church where the saints would, Saint Francis, a lot of them would physically would do a lot of crazy physical pain for themselves to themselves. Like Saint Francis used to roll around naked in the snow. It's as a way to purify yourself, and that's such an antiquated, perverse, like the idea of but it's funny because physical pain, there is gain sometimes. If you work out, it sucks. It's physically harmful, but there is noticeable gain. There is a lot of good things in life, a lot of things that you've got to work hard to earn money. And so there is pain and reward in life for sure. But they take that and they hijack that idea where you're convinced that the pain you're going through now will produce spiritual rewards that'll be so much greater. So the more physical pain you're going through on earth, the greater the spiritual reward you'll have in heaven, And so that puts you in the mindset of thinking you can of discounting the trauma you'll deal with later in life. Right. You don't think about that at all. You're not thinking about the rest of you're thinking about the rest of your eternity. You're not thinking about the rest of your life. And that's another really, really damaging things cults do, is that they make you, they make you devalue your own life. The
Big
next
time.
thing
That's
is
right.
what's important.
That's right.
Who cares about this life? When the stakes are eternal punishment. That mindset is, that's the key. That's the key ingredient with cults and coercion, is the false stakes they put in your head, the false reward. The way they hijack that pain reward kind of process.
You nailed it. I couldn't put it better myself, man. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Okay, we have run out of time. We've allocated ourselves for an hour for this one, and so we have we covered a lot. And I'm really thankful for you reaching out to me and sharing your story with me and giving the specifics of this, and an ability to highlight this form of abuse, because it needs to be talked about and recognized more for what it is. And that's why I wanted to have you on to talk about this stuff. So thank you, Anthony.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And there's a lot more. There's other things I could talk about for sure. Maybe we can do this again sometime. We'll see.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for having me on.
You bet, man. And out there, I want your feedback. I want to hear what you have to think about and say about all of this, right? I know there's a lot of pro and a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment out there. This was not, and I hope I set this up properly, I hope you guys got it, that this was not some big anti-Catholic rant for the whole hour. This was, we're talking about abusive behavior within a group that I said at the get-go is not some big international destructive cult, okay? So I hope we all remember that when we are writing our comments in response to this, right? We want to address abuse. And if abuse exists in any organization, it's wrong. If it exists in any church, it's wrong. We can do something about that, and we don't have to tear the whole thing or burn the whole thing down to the ground in order to solve that. Okay, so on that happy note, thank you very much for coming around and listening to us gabber on about this. I very much appreciate your viewership and your support, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.